This video is aimed at advanced users of the grid component who have an understanding of JavaScript and who also are using the grid object methods in their own JavaScript code. So basically, when you call a method of the grid object, typically what you do is you use the grid object placeholder there, and then you specify the method. So for example, grid object dot refresh would refresh the grid, and at runtime this placeholder grid object gets replaced with the alias of the grid that you're actually running. But the problem arises when you have a grid that opens up a child grid. So you can see here, for example, that we've got this grid, and this grid has linked content over here. So inside this child grid, this linked content grid, or if I were to go here and say press this button, so now inside this grid over here, if I wanted to execute a method of this grid, there would be no problem. I would just use curly bracket dot grid object as my placeholder for the grid alias. But if I wanted to execute a method on my parent grid, in other words the grid object, the grid that opened up this grid, there was previously no way to programmatically get a pointer to the parent grid. So we've added a new property to the grid object that tells you what the name of the alias of your parent grid is. So you can see here that if I were to close this down and click this button over there, this tells me that this grid that I'm in has an alias called grid1, and it does not have a parent grid. On the other hand, inside this grid here, which is linked content, if I would say who's my parent, you can see here that my parent is grid1, which was this grid over here, and this grid over here, in other words the child grid, has this as its alias. On the other hand, if we were to go here and pop up a pop-up window and then say who am I, you can see here that this grid that I'm in the window has this alias over here, and the parent grid is grid1. Whereas if I were to go, for example, here and open up a row expander now, which is then I can see that this grid now is called grid1 underbar R4G1, which stands for row 4, and the parent is grid1. So basically throughout the through all the grids now, basically they know who their parent are, and because they know who their parent are now, makes it very easy to now call methods on the parent object. So you can see here inside this linked grid over here, if I say navigate in parent, instead of navigating in this grid, I'm going to navigate in my parent grid. So this will move me from page 1 to page 2. So let's go ahead and do that, and you can go ahead there and see how that works. So let's go now and take a look at how this was done. So I'm going to go here and let's just look at this button, which is the button that says who am I and who is my parent, and let's take a look at the JavaScript over there. So you can see now that basically grid object dot grid ID gives me the alias of the current grid, the grid I'm in, and then the name of the parent grid comes from grid object dot parent grid alias. So there's this new property that's stored in the grid object called parent grid alias, and that tells me who my parent is. And what we've done here is we've said if my parent is null, then just report back no parent. But now let's go take a look at the child grid that was opened up, which had the button that said navigate in parent, and let's take a look at the code there. So let's go here and pause that, and I'm going to pause the video now and pick it up in the next video to explain exactly what this JavaScript does.